The rain had just begun when Sandra stepped off the old bus, her coat heavy with the smell of damp fabric and exhausted engines. She had traveled for hours, yet she felt as if she had moved through years instead, pulled by memories she once tried to bury so deep they would never rise again. The small town looked almost the same as when she had run from it as a girl, the cracked sidewalks still patched with uneven tar, the lonely streetlight at the corner still flickering as if too tired to keep shining, and the same restless breeze slipping between the houses. She felt the weight of the past pressing against her spine, urging her to turn back, but something inside her whispered that this time she had to face what she had run from. 27 years of silence had stretched between her and the one person she never expected to leave behind, and now he wanted to see her. He had asked for her after all this time. Keanu. The truth was that Sandra had tried to ignore the message when it appeared in her inbox, a quiet, almost fragile note from someone who once carried so much chaos in his heart and yet showed her a kindness no one else ever had. She remembered reading his words slowly, her fingers trembling. "I need to tell you something," he wrote. "After all these years, you deserve the truth. Please come." She had stared at the screen for a long time, her chest tightening as if each word pulled her back to a version of herself she no longer recognized. She wondered why Keanu waited so long, why he chose now, and what truth he thought she deserved. But even as fear pressed against her, curiosity and a buried affection rose stronger. She could not deny it. They had shared something once, something warm, fragile, and dangerous in its own way, something she had run from. Sandra walked slowly toward the small diner at the end of the street, the place Keanu had chosen for their meeting. She remembered it well. It was the spot where they sometimes met secretly after school, hiding their worries in the smell of coffee and the soft hum of worn-out jukebox speakers. She remembered how Keanu used to sit beside her instead of across, resting his arm on the back of the booth with an unspoken promise that if anyone tried to hurt her again, he would stand between her and the world. He had always been rough around the edges, always in trouble, always bruised from fights he never started but always finished. Yet to her, he had never been frightening. He had been warmth. He had been safe, even when he was just a boy. Her shoes left small wet prints on the diner floor as she pushed the door open. The bell chimed softly, a delicate sound that made her heart ache with nostalgia. The place was nearly empty, just a tired man sipping coffee at the counter and a waitress wiping down a table. The air smelled like frying eggs, fresh pastries, and something familiar that made Sandra's chest tight. She scanned the room, searching for the face she had not seen in almost 3 decades. She wondered if he would look the same. She wondered if he would recognize her immediately or pretend. He did not feel the shock she expected to feel herself. Then she saw him. Keanu sat in the far booth, his back straight, his hands folded tightly in front of him. He was older, of course. The boyish angles of his face had been replaced with lines drawn by time and grief. His hair, once wild and careless, was shorter now, a few strands carrying the silver of years that had passed without her. But his eyes, those deep, gentle eyes she remembered, were the same. They held the same quiet storm, the same unspoken longing for peace, the same silent stories that had always made her want to understand him. When he saw her walking toward him, his expression shifted. Something like relief, fear, and a deep, aching tenderness washed over his face, as if he had spent years imagining this moment and still found himself unprepared for it. "Sandra," he whispered when she reached the table, his voice trembling. "You came." She sat across from him slowly, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. "You asked," she replied. "I guess I couldn't ignore that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence hung heavy, stretching between them like a bridge built of memories no one wanted to step on. Sandra studied him closely, noticing the way his hands shook slightly, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze drifted away as if he feared meeting her eyes too directly. She knew this meeting meant something to him, something important. She could feel it in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Finally, Keanu spoke softly. "I've spent years thinking about this moment. Every day I told myself I should reach out, but I never knew how. I never knew if you would even want to hear from me." Sandra swallowed. "I didn't expect to," she admitted. "But when I saw your message, it felt like something inside me just stopped, like part of me had been waiting for it." Keanu looked down at his hands, his lips pressing together. "I never forgot you," he said quietly, "not even for a single year." Sandra's breath caught. She tried to hide the emotion rising in her chest, but she felt it anyway, that old ache, that strange mix of fear and affection. She had spent years trying to forget him, trying to convince herself that what they had shared was just youthful confusion. But now, sitting here and hearing his voice again, she realized something painful and undeniable. She had never forgotten him either. "Why now, Keanu?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you reach out after so long?" Keanu's eyes darkened, and he leaned back slightly as if bracing himself. "Because I finally have the courage," he said, "and because something happened that made me realize I can't carry this anymore, not alone." Sandra felt fear coil slowly in her stomach. Carry what? Keanu hesitated, his eyes wandering to the window, watching the rain sliding down the glass like slow tears. His voice softened. "Before I tell you, I need you to know something." He paused, swallowing. "I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did back then, everything I stayed silent about, I thought it was the best way to protect you. I thought I was doing the right thing." Sandra frowned slightly. "Protect me from what?" Keanu's jaw tightened, and his hands clenched briefly before relaxing again. "From the truth," he whispered. Sandra studied him carefully. Years ago, Keanu had been the one who stepped in whenever her world collapsed. He had defended her when no one else dared, offered kindness when others gave cruelty, and carried burdens he never shared. She remembered the night he had shown up outside her house, his knuckles bleeding, his voice shaking as he told her he was fine. But she knew even then that he hid more than he revealed. "Keanu," she said softly, "I'm not the same girl I used to be. I can handle the truth now. Whatever it is, just tell me." But Keanu only shook his head slightly. "You think you can," he said, "but this isn't something anyone handles easily." Sandra felt a chill slide down her spine. "You're scaring me." He finally looked at her directly, and the depth in his gaze made her breath falter. "I never wanted that, but before I tell you anything, you need to understand why I'm doing this now." He took a deep breath. "I've been sick, Sandra." The words hit her like a sudden blow. "Sick," she repeated softly, her eyes widening. "Keanu, what do you mean?" He looked down, his voice rough. "I don't know how much time I have left." The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Sandra gripped the edge of the table, her mind spinning. This could not be how their reunion began. This could not be the first truth he shared after 27 years of silence. "Is it serious?" she whispered. Keanu nodded slowly. "Serious enough that I can't waste any more time. Serious enough that I need to tell you everything before it's too late." Sandra felt her throat tighten. Fear wrapped around her so fiercely she almost struggled to breathe. She wanted to reach across the table, to hold his hand like she used to when they were young and scared, but she stayed still, afraid that touching him would make the moment too real, too final. "Keanu," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I convinced myself I didn't deserve to," he said, pain flickering across his face. "I convinced myself that I had lost the right to ask anything of you. But now I need to tell you the truth about what happened back then, the truth about why I disappeared, the truth about who I really was." Sandra's heart pounded as she leaned in. "Keanu, what truth?" Keanu met her gaze slowly, his eyes dark with something she could not name. "The truth," he said softly, "about the night everything changed, the night you never knew about, the night that shaped the rest of my life and yours." Sandra stared at him, her pulse thundering. She had always known something had happened, something he never told her. But hearing him say it, hearing him promise that the truth tied their lives together, made her chest tighten with anticipation and dread. "What happened that night?" she breathed. Keanu looked away for a moment, his expression haunted. "I can tell you," he whispered, "but once I do, nothing between us will ever be the same again." Sandra felt her entire body go still. "Keanu," she said faintly, "tell me." Keanu exhaled shakily, his lips parting as if he was about to reveal the weight he had carried for decades. But before he could speak, the diner door swung open behind them with a sudden force, letting in a rush of cold air and the heavy sound of boots hitting the floor. Sandra turned instinctively, and her breath caught when she saw the figure stepping inside, someone she had never expected to see again, someone connected to the very past she and Keanu shared, someone whose presence alone felt like a warning. Keanu's face paled when he saw the person, his entire body tensed. The stranger's eyes locked onto their booth with a sharp, chilling focus. "You're early," Keanu whispered, his voice barely audible, his expression filled with dread that made Sandra's skin prickle with fear. Sandra stared between them, her heart racing. "Keanu, who is that?" He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "The reason I stayed silent, The reason I ran, the reason I couldn't tell you the truth until now." Sandra's breath stopped. "And now," Keanu whispered, "he knows you're here." The stranger took another step toward them, the tension in the room growing so heavy that even the waitress froze mid-motion. And in that terrifying moment, Sandra realized that whatever Keanu had been hiding all these years was far darker and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The stranger's presence swallowed the diner's warmth in seconds, turning the soft hum of morning voices into a cold, fragile silence. Sandra watched him approach, each heavy step echoing with a kind of quiet authority that made her skin tighten and her chest shrink. He moved with a confidence that felt rehearsed, as though he had walked into rooms like this for years, expecting people to fall silent at the sound of his footsteps. His coat, dark and weather-beaten, dripped rainwater onto the diner floor, forming small puddles that reflected the flickering overhead lights. He did not bother to wipe his boots or glance at the startled waitress still frozen with a damp cloth in her hand. He only had eyes for their booth, for Keanu. Sandra felt her breath catch as the stranger stopped at the edge of their table, close enough that she could see the thin scar running down his left cheek, a pale line against his otherwise weathered skin. His eyes were dark and focused, the kind of eyes that had witnessed too much and cared too little. But there was something else in them too, something she could not name, a kind of restrained fury or maybe disappointment, like someone who had spent years chasing a ghost, and finally found it sitting in a diner booth pretending to drink coffee. Keanu did not look away. He sat still, his hands folded tightly, his shoulders tense. There was a strange mix of fear and acceptance in his expression, as if he had known this moment would come eventually and had spent years imagining it. But even in his fear, he did not seem surprised, not even a little. To Sandra, that was the most unsettling part. The stranger's voice was low, roughened by age or anger or both. "You weren't supposed to meet yet," he said, addressing Keanu with a tone that sounded almost like accusation. "You promised you would wait." Keanu swallowed hard and replied quietly, "Plans changed." The stranger's eyes flicked briefly toward Sandra. The intensity of his gaze made her spine stiffen, and for a moment she felt like he could see every secret she had ever tried to hide. Something about the way he studied her made her wonder whether he had known about her long before she ever knew he existed. "You brought her," the stranger said slowly. "You really brought her here." "She deserved to know," Keanu whispered. The stranger leaned closer, his voice lowered. "She deserved safety." His gaze locked on Sandra again. "And safety is the one thing you've never been able to give her." Those words struck something inside Sandra like the sound of breaking glass. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell him he did not know her, did not know Keanu, did not know anything about the years they had shared as children. But the stranger's eyes carried a warning she did not understand, a warning that made her swallow her words and sit back slowly. Keanu exhaled shakily. "Don't blame her for my decisions," he said. "If anyone deserves your anger, it's me, not her." The stranger's lips curved slightly, though it was not a smile, more like disbelief. "You think this is about blame?" he asked. "No, Keanu, this is about consequences, and those don't disappear just because you decided to finally talk." Sandra felt a nervous pulse throbbing in her neck. "Who are you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling despite her attempts to stay composed. The stranger ignored her at first, focusing on Keanu as if Sandra's question was a sound carried by the wind rather than something spoken by a frightened woman sitting inches away. The quiet dismissal stung, yet she sensed it was not personal. It was intentional, strategic. She sensed he did not want her involved, did not want her anywhere near whatever history he and Keanu shared, which meant she was already too deep into something dangerous without even understanding its shape. After several seconds, the stranger finally turned his head, his eyes meeting hers with a sharp, piercing focus. "My name doesn't matter," he said, though his tone suggested it mattered very much. "What matters is that I'm the person who has been cleaning up the mess he left behind." Keanu flinched, but he did not deny it. Sandra felt confusion twist inside her. "Mess," she repeated. "What are you talking about?" The stranger sighed deeply, a sound heavy with years of exhaustion. "You think you know him," he said. "You think you know the boy he was, the friend he was, the protector he pretended to be. But you have no idea what he became after he left this town, no idea what he did, and no idea how close you came to being dragged into it." Sandra's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced at Keanu, searching for reassurance, but his gaze stayed down and his silence felt like confirmation of something she feared to imagine. Keanu, she whispered, what is he talking about? Keanu finally met her eyes, and the sorrow in his expression made her stomach twist. I was trying to protect you, he said softly. I didn't want any of this to touch you. The stranger scoffed. Protect her by dragging her back here, by meeting with her behind everyone's back. You think that's protection? He shook his head. You never learn. Keanu's voice tightened. She was always involved whether you like it or not. Not by my choice, the stranger snapped. Not by mine either, Keanu said. Their words hung in the air like heavy stones. Sandra felt the weight of them sinking into her chest, making it harder to breathe. She had come here thinking Keanu wanted to confess something personal, something emotional, maybe even something tied to their painful childhood. She never imagined he had been living a life that involved strangers with scars and warnings and talk of consequences. The waitress broke the tension for a moment by nervously approaching their booth. Can I get you all something?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The stranger didn't look at her. "We're fine," he said quickly, his tone sharp enough to make her retreat instantly. Keanu watched her walk away, guilt flickering in his eyes. He turned back to the stranger. "We shouldn't do this here," he said quietly. "She doesn't need an audience." "You should have thought of that before you brought her into the open," the stranger replied. "You think no one saw you together? You think no one noticed she came back to town after all these years? This was careless, Keanu, even for you." Sandra frowned deeply. "Wait," she interjected. "Saw us, noticed, who would even care? I'm just someone who used to live here. I barely know anyone anymore." The stranger sighed as though her innocence irritated him. "You don't understand. You were important. Your connection to him was important. People remembered. Some of them watched. Some of them asked questions." She shook her head slowly, trying to piece together thoughts that felt scattered. Why would anyone care about something that happened almost 30 years ago? The stranger's eyes softened slightly, though not with kindness, more like pity. "Because the past never disappears," he said, "especially not when it's unfinished." Sandra felt a strange shiver run down her arms. She looked at Keanu, who looked defeated in a way she had never seen, not even when they were young and the world had already weighed heavily on his shoulders. She leaned closer to him, her voice trembling. "Keanu, please tell me what's going on." Keanu inhaled slowly, his eyes filled with frustration and something deeper, a kind of sorrow that looked like it had been building for years. "I will," he promised. "But I need you to hear it from me, not from him, not from anyone else." The stranger crossed his arms. "She's not ready." "You don't get to decide that," Keanu said sharply, surprising both Sandra and the stranger with the sudden force in his voice. For a moment the stranger stared at him in silence. Then he nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a boundary he didn't like but had to accept. "Fine," he said. "Tell her, but don't expect her to stay once she hears it." Sandra felt her stomach twist tighter. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Stay. Why wouldn't I stay?" Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, his gaze heavy with a truth he feared would break her. "Because the night I disappeared," he whispered, "was not the night you think it was." Sandra felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "You thought I left because I wanted to escape everything here," Keanu said. "You thought I was tired of the fights, the trouble, the pain, and I let you believe that because it was easier than telling you the real reason." "Keanu, the truth is," he said, cutting himself off with a trembling breath, "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had no choice." The stranger stiffened slightly, but did not interrupt. "No choice," Sandra repeated. "Why, what happened?" Keanu hesitated, his hands shaking. "That night, the night before I left, something happened that I've been hiding for almost 30 years. Something I never wanted you to know because it would have destroyed everything good you remembered about me." The stranger stepped forward, his presence heavy. "Enough. If you're going to tell her, then we need to go somewhere safer. This place has too many windows, too many ears." Sandra felt panic rise in her chest. "Safer from what? From who?" The stranger gave her a tired, grim look. "From the people who were looking for him back then," he said, "and the people who still are." Sandra froze completely. Keanu stood up slowly. "We need to leave," he said, his voice soft but urgent. "I'll explain everything, Sandra, I promise, but not here." Sandra hesitated, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Something inside her screamed that leaving with them would pull her into a storm she could not escape. But another part, the part that had carried silent questions for decades, the part that still cared for Keanu despite everything, urged her to follow. She needed answers. She needed the truth. She finally stood. But the moment she did, the stranger's expression shifted sharply. He moved toward the window, pressing his hand briefly against the glass as he scanned the street outside. His jaw tightened. "We're too late," he whispered. Keanu stiffened. "What do you mean?" The stranger turned back, his expression grim. "They found you." Sandra's breath hitched. "Who?" He looked directly at her. "The people Keanu has been running from for almost 30 years. Keanu's face paled. Sandra turned toward the window, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Outside, through the streaks of rain on the glass, she saw two dark cars slowly pulling up beside the diner. The engines stayed running. The windows tinted black. The doors didn't open. But she could feel eyes watching them. "Waiting." The stranger leaned closer to Keanu. "You should have stayed hidden," he murmured. Keanu swallowed hard. "I couldn't." Sandra stared at the cars, fear filling her chest like ice. "Keanu," she whispered, "what did you do?" Keanu looked at her with an expression she would never forget. A mix of guilt, desperation, and a love that had never faded despite the years of silence. "The thing I did," he whispered. "I did to save you." The car door opened with a slow, chilling certainty, the kind that made Sandra's entire body tense as if every instinct inside her screamed that the world she knew was about to collapse. Rain spilled inside the diner each time the door swung, bringing with it the cold scent of wet asphalt and something darker she couldn't name. Keanu stood close beside her, his hand trembling slightly though he tried to hide it. The stranger stepped forward, his posture rigid and alert, his gaze locked on the shadow stepping out of the first car. The figure was tall, wrapped in a long dark coat that clung to his frame like a second skin. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that made him feel far more dangerous than the loud, aggressive men Sandra sometimes saw in movies or the careless ones she remembered from her childhood. There was a calmness about him, the kind that suggested he did not need to prove anything. He already knew the power he held. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but even from a distance, Sandra felt the weight of his presence pressing through the diner's glass like a warning. Then a second door opened from the other car, and another figure stepped out, smaller but faster, scanning the area with quick, sharp movements that reminded her of a predator searching for its prey. Inside the diner, everything grew painfully still. Even the old man at the counter had stopped sipping his coffee, his trembling hands gripping the mug as if afraid to draw attention. The stranger, the one with the scar, turned to Keanu with urgency tightening his jaw. "We have seconds," he whispered. "You know what that means." Keanu nodded slowly, his face pale but determined. "I'm not running this time." The scarred stranger clenched his teeth. "You don't have to run, but she does." He pointed toward Sandra with a firm, almost harsh movement. "If they find you together, everything you did to protect her will mean nothing." Sandra felt her pulse thundering, her body cold and heavy with a fear she had not experienced since childhood, the kind that steals breath and demands stillness. "Keanu," she whispered, "what do they want? Why are they here?" Keanu turned to her, his eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it almost hurt to look at him. "They want to finish what started years ago," he said softly, "and they won't stop until they do." "What started?" she pressed, voice trembling. "What happened back then that was so terrible?" Keanu's lips parted as if he was finally ready, truly ready, to reveal everything he had kept hidden for nearly 30 years. But before he could speak, the diner door slammed open with such force that the bell above it let out a sharp, desperate jingle. The tall figure walked inside first, the smaller one following close behind. Both men paused just long enough to take in the scene: the nearly empty diner, the frightened waitress, the scarred stranger standing defensively, and Keanu and Sandra halfway between sitting and standing. The tall man pushed back his hood, revealing a face that looked hardened by decades of violence and loss. Deep lines framed his eyes, and the coldness in his expression felt carved from stone. He spoke with surprising softness. "Keanu." Keanu stiffened, meeting the man's gaze with a mix of resignation and defiance. "Raul." Sandra's heart shook, so they knew each other, and not as strangers. Raul looked at Keanu for a long, silent moment, as if he was measuring him, searching for something long lost. Then his gaze drifted toward Sandra, and she felt herself freeze as though caught in the center of a spotlight. The intensity of his stare was almost unbearable. So this is her, Raoul murmured. The girl you thought was worth everything. The smaller man beside him snorted. She doesn't look like much. The scarred stranger stepped forward, positioning himself between Sandra and the two intruders, his stance steady and protective. Leave her out of this, he said firmly. She has nothing to do with what happened. Raoul raised an eyebrow. Everyone has something to do with what happened. Keanu quickly moved to stand between Sandra and Raoul, blocking Raoul's line of sight. If you want me, Keanu said quietly, take me, but you don't touch her, not now, not ever. Raoul's lips curved slightly, a faint, unsettling expression that wasn't quite a smile. Keanu, he said softly, you know it's not that simple. Sandra felt her knees weaken. Tell me what's going on, she whispered, her voice barely audible now, but Keanu didn't turn, he couldn't. His focus stayed on Raoul. The scarred stranger stepped forward. If you came here to settle a score, do it outside, he said. There are witnesses, and this isn't your territory. Raoul's gaze flicked toward him with mild irritation. You don't give me orders, he said. Not here, not anywhere. I'm not giving orders, the stranger replied. I'm reminding you that the world is watching. Everyone has phones, cameras. You know what happens if this gets messy. Raoul stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. I didn't come here to make a scene. He glanced at Keanu again. I came here to collect what is owed. Keanu's breath caught. I don't owe you anything anymore. The smaller man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You owe us everything. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm, panic rising so quickly she felt dizzy. Keanu, what did you do? She whispered. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, as if wrestling with a pain too deep to hide. I made a choice, he whispered, and I've been paying for it ever since. Raoul's voice cut through the silence. Are you ready to talk now? He asked. Or do we have to take you somewhere less public? Keanu remained silent, his jaw tightening. Raoul sighed again, this time sounding almost disappointed. You always were stubborn. The scarred stranger moved closer, lowering his voice. You told me you were done with him, he muttered. You told me you walked away for good. Keanu nodded. I thought I did. Clearly you were wrong, Raoul said. At that moment, the air grew heavier, so dense it felt like the walls themselves were leaning inward. The small waitress peeked nervously from behind the counter, frozen in place, trying to understand what kind of nightmare she had walked into. The old man at the counter pretended to read his newspaper, but Sandra could see his trembling hands beneath the pages. Raoul finally stepped back a little, glancing toward the door. We'll talk outside, he said, all of us. Sandra shook her head immediately. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm not going anywhere with you. Raoul looked at her again, the coldness in his eyes shifting into something more curious. You think you have a choice? He asked gently. Keanu stepped in front of Sandra fully now, blocking her from view. If she goes, he said, I go, and if I go, you get everything you came for. The scarred stranger shot Keanu a sharp look. Think carefully, he hissed. You know what they want. I know, Keanu said softly, and it's the only way she stays alive. Sandra's heart plummeted. Keanu, no, she said, grabbing his arm. You can't, you don't even know what they'll do. I do, he whispered. And you still want to go with them. I don't want to, he said, but I might have to. Raoul waited in silence, watching the scene unfold like someone waiting for a decision he had predicted years ago. The scarred stranger grabbed Keanu's shoulder. If you go with them now, there's no coming back, he warned. You know this. I've known that since the beginning, Keanu whispered. But Sandra could see something else in his eyes, something beyond fear, beyond resignation. It was a determination rooted in a memory she had not yet learned, something tied to the night he left her without a word. He had been carrying guilt for years, guilt that had shaped his choices, his silence, his exile. Keanu, she whispered, her voice shaking, tell me the truth, now, before you take another step. Keanu turned to her slowly, and for the first time since she walked into the diner, she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes, pure heartbreak. I left because of them, he said quietly, because they gave me a choice that night, a terrible one. Sandra swallowed hard. What choice? Keanu took a slow, trembling breath, as if every word carried years of buried pain. They told me if I didn't leave town, he whispered, you would never wake up the next morning. The room dropped into silence. Sandra felt her world tilt violently, as though the floor beneath her had shifted and left her suspended. "Me," she whispered. "They threatened me." Keanu nodded. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to live your life in fear because of something I did." Raoul stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "He made a deal," he said calmly. "He promised to disappear. He promised to stay gone. He promised he would never contact you again, and for nearly 30 years he kept his word." The smaller man laughed under his breath. "Until now." Sandra stared at Keanu, tears forming in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would they threaten me? What did you do that was so terrible that they wanted to hurt me for it?" Keanu's voice was barely audible. "I saved someone I wasn't supposed to save. I got in the way of something I didn't understand, and they wanted to punish me. I begged them not to hurt the truth that breaks everything." The rain outside had grown heavier, pounding against the diner windows as if the sky itself was warning them that time was slipping away. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, low and rumbling, the kind of sound that shook the air just enough to make every breath feel tense. Sandra stood frozen, her heart unraveling as Keanu's unfinished confession hung between them, dangling like a frayed rope that threatened to snap with the slightest pull. Raoul watched her closely, his expression unreadable, the hard lines of his jaw tightening as though he expected her to break down or collapse in fear. The smaller man beside him stood with arms crossed, impatience flickering across his sharp features. But Sandra didn't look at them. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on Keanu, searching desperately for the truth he had been about to reveal. "Finish your sentence," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she didn't yet understand. "You said you begged them not to hurt me because what?" Keanu's breath trembled. His eyes glistened with a pain she had never seen on anyone, not even in the worst years of her childhood. He opened his mouth slowly, as though speaking had become a task far heavier than breathing. But before he could answer, the scarred stranger grabbed his arm urgently. "We don't have time," he said, his tone sharp. "They're not here to talk. They came to take you, or both of you." Sandra's stomach dropped. "Both." Raoul's voice slid into the air like a blade. "Your presence complicates things, Sandra," he said calmly, "and complicated things rarely end well." "She didn't do anything," Keanu snapped, placing himself protectively in front of her again. "Leave her out of whatever you think you're going to do." Raoul sighed, the sound almost disappointed. "You keep saying that as though your words hold the power they once did. They don't. You were given a simple task decades ago. Disappear, stay silent, stay gone, and you broke that promise the moment you sent that message." Sandra turned to Keanu, confusion burning inside her. "You sent the message," she whispered, "so you did know they would come." Keanu's shoulders sagged. "I hoped they wouldn't find out," he said weakly. "I hoped we would have enough time to talk before they appeared. I thought maybe I could explain everything before they dragged me away." The scarred stranger let out a bitter huff. "You thought wrong," he muttered. Raoul took a slow step forward. "Enough stalling, you know why we're here." Keanu stiffened. "I'm not going with you," he said quietly. "Not unless you tell her the truth first." Raoul's eyes narrowed. "You're bargaining again," he said. "You never learn." "I'm not bargaining," Keanu replied. "I'm asking for something you owe both of us." The smaller man scoffed. "We don't owe anyone anything." Raoul raised a hand slightly, silencing him with a single gesture. Then he turned back to Keanu. "Speak," he said. "Tell her, but be careful. Once she hears it, she will never look at you the same way again." Keanu swallowed hard. "I already know that." Sandra felt dread settling deep inside her bones. Every instinct told her that whatever Keanu was about to reveal would shatter something important, something she had held onto without knowing. The diner grew so quiet she could hear the distant hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft drip of rainwater slipping from the roof. Keanu looked at her, his chest rising and falling as though he was preparing to confess a lifetime of sins. "Sandra," he whispered, "the night I left, the night before I disappeared, I wasn't just threatened. I was told a truth I never wanted you to know." Sandra's entire body tensed. "What truth?" Keanu glanced at Raoul, then at the scarred stranger as though asking for permission to continue. Raoul said nothing, his expression unreadable but his attention unwavering. Keanu turned back to her. "You remember your father," he whispered softly. The mention of her father slammed into her chest like a blow. Of course she remembered him, The yelling, the fists, the bruises she tried to hide with long sleeves at school, the nights she cried silently because she knew her mother couldn't protect her. He was the reason she ran from this town. He was the first shadow she thought she had escaped forever. Sandra's voice trembled. What about him? Keanu looked down at his shaking hands. That night, I found him. I found him hurting someone again. Sandra's breath caught. Hurting who? Keanu's eyes lifted slowly, filled with grief. You. The world around Sandra seemed to tilt sideways. She felt her breath leave her body in a sudden rush, as though someone had punched her without touching her. That's not possible, she whispered. I wasn't home that night. I was staying with my aunt. Keanu shook his head. No, you were supposed to, but she didn't come to pick you up. You called me instead. You told me you would wait for her in your bedroom. I rushed there because your voice sounded scared. Sandra pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, trying to recall the details. She remembered her aunt being late. She remembered sitting on the edge of her bed with her small bag packed, but she couldn't remember anything else, not the ending of the night, not how she fell asleep. Nothing. Keanu continued. When I got to your house, the door was already open. I heard shouting. I heard you crying. Sandra clutched her chest, shaking her head slowly, as though refusing to let the memory surface. I don't remember any of this, she whispered. Keanu's voice shook. I found your father standing over you. He had already grabbed you. He was yelling things I don't want to repeat. You were trying to push him away, but he was stronger. Sandra felt sick, as if the room had grown too small to contain the horror rising inside her. Keanu drew in a trembling breath. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just acted. I pulled him off you. He came at me swinging, I fought back. I didn't stop until he fell. Her hands shook violently now. Fell, she whispered. Fell how? Keanu closed his eyes. He hit his head on the table corner. He wasn't moving. There was so much blood. Sandra's legs nearly gave out, and she grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. No, she whispered. No, that can't be true. Someone would have told me. The police would have. Raoul interrupted. The police never came because we didn't let them. Sandra's eyes snapped toward him, wide with shock. Raoul continued. Your father didn't die, but he wasn't far from it. We arrived because we had been watching Keanu. We knew where he went. We knew what happened. And we cleaned up the mess before anyone could find out. Sandra stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? You helped him. Raoul shook his head. We didn't help him, we recruited him. Keanu's shoulders slumped. Recruited, Sandra whispered. Recruited for what? For us, Raoul said simply. For the organization. Keanu owed us for what we saved him from a prison sentence that would have lasted decades or worse. We gave him a new name, a new life, a new purpose. And in return, he belonged to us. Sandra felt the room spinning. So all these years, you were working for them. Keanu nodded weakly. At first, I did it because I had no choice. They made it clear if I refused, they would tell everyone what happened, and they would drag you into it. But you were saving me, Sandra whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. You were saving me from him. Keanu's voice cracked. I couldn't let them use that against you, so I took the deal. Raoul stepped closer. And he was good, very good, better than most, but he made one mistake. Sandra wiped her tears quickly. What mistake? Raoul's gaze locked onto hers. He wouldn't cut ties with you, even after leaving, even after starting a new life. He begged us not to hurt you. He refused to let us erase you from his memories, and that made him weak. Keanu stiffened. She was the only good thing I had. Raoul tilted his head. Which is why we told him that if he ever reached out to you again, even once, we would come back. Sandra felt her throat tighten, and he did. Yes, Raoul said, he did. The scarred stranger stepped between them suddenly. Enough, he said. You said he could tell her, he did. Now you take him and leave her alone. Raoul's eyes hardened. She knows now, and knowing makes her a problem. Keanu turned fiercely. You promised. That was before you broke the rules, Raoul said calmly. The smaller man reached into his coat slowly, and the entire diner seemed to freeze. Sandra's breath hitched. Keanu. Keanu moved instinctively, pulling her behind him as Raoul and the smaller man stepped forward in unison. The scarred stranger spread his stance, preparing for a fight he knew he couldn't win. The waitress ducked behind the counter. The old man dropped his mug, the shatter loud and sharp in the suffocating silence. Raoul nodded at the smaller man, and then the smaller man reached deeper into his coat. Sandra squeezed her eyes shut, but when she opened them again, she saw something she never expected. He wasn't pulling out a weapon. He was pulling out a phone. Raoul's voice was low. "We have orders, bring him in, bring her too." The scarred stranger cursed under his breath. Keanu's face drained of color. "They want Sandra," Keanu whispered. "Why?" Raoul held up the phone, showing a message Sandra couldn't read from that distance. "Because," Raoul said calmly, "your father woke up a week ago." The room fell silent. Keanu staggered. Sandra felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her. "Woke up," Keanu whispered, horror filling his eyes. "That's impossible." Raoul tucked the phone back into his coat. "He's awake, he's talking, and the first thing he asked about," his eyes slowly shifted toward Sandra, cold and sharp, "was her." Sandra's heart stopped. Raoul stepped back, motioning to the door. "You're both coming with us now." The scarred stranger moved to block the way, but Raoul's cold gaze pinned him in place. "Don't be stupid," Raoul warned. "You can't protect them from this." Sandra felt Keanu grip her hand tightly, his voice breaking with fear and desperation. "Sandra," he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should never have brought you here. I should never have." But he didn't finish. Because at that moment the diner lights flickered violently, the front door burst open, and someone rushed inside, breathless and soaked from the rain. Sandra froze. It was a face she thought she would never see again. And he spoke only one sentence, before the world shattered around them, the message from a ghost. The man who rushed into the diner stood dripping with rainwater, his chest rising and falling with frantic breaths. The harsh glow of the flickering lights above made his face look pale, stretched thin with fear, exhaustion, and something else, urgency. Sandra blinked several times, unable to recognize him at first, her mind still spinning from Raoul's revelation about her father. But the longer she stared, the more pieces of her memory began to rearrange themselves like scattered photographs, slowly forming a familiar portrait. The man was older, worn by years. Sandra did not remember living beside him. But his eyes, those soft brown eyes she once knew, had not changed. They held a sadness she remembered from summers long gone, a gentle warmth she hadn't felt since childhood. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "It can't be." The man stepped forward hesitantly, his gaze flicking to Keanu, then to Raoul, then back to her. "Sandra, it's me, Michael." Sandra's breath caught. Michael, her mother's cousin. The man who used to bring her little pastries when she was a girl, always after her father's anger had made her too shaken to eat dinner. He used to tell her stories about forests and brave heroes and lost treasures, pretending not to hear her mother crying in the kitchen. And then one day, when Sandra was still a teenager, he disappeared from her life. She never knew why. She never asked. She never expected to see him again. "Michael," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "What are you doing here? I thought." "I know," he interrupted softly. "I know what you thought, and I know what I let you believe, but I had to stay away for reasons you never should have been dragged into, reasons tied to your father and to him." He nodded toward Keanu. Keanu stiffened. Raoul did not move, but a small shift in his expression revealed a glimmer of recognition. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition, as if Michael was someone he had expected might appear one day but hoped never would. The smaller man beside Raoul muttered under his breath, "This just got worse." Raoul raised a hand slightly, stopping the smaller man from speaking again, his gaze locked on Michael. "You shouldn't have come," he said calmly. Michael shook his head. "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Raoul replied. "Not when he's involved," Michael said with a quiet, grim certainty. Sandra felt her knees weaken. "Who?" she whispered. "Who is involved?" Michael looked directly at her and his voice softened. "Your father." Those two words made the diner feel colder than the storm outside. Sandra shook her head automatically, rejecting the implication, rejecting the horror in Michael's tone. "My father," she said. "You mean he sent you here? Why? How? You said he's involved, but involved in what?" Keanu stepped closer to her, as though preparing to shield her from whatever answer Michael was about to give. Raoul's expression tightened, and he leaned against the table as if settling in to watch the inevitable collapse of something fragile and long protected. Michael took a slow breath. Your father woke up a week ago, he said. But he wasn't alone. The people who got to him, they're powerful, they're angry, and they want what Keanu took from them nearly 30 years ago. Your father is the one who told them where to find him. Sandra felt her world tilt violently. No, she whispered. Why would my father do that? He hated Keanu, but not enough to. Michael cut her off gently. Your father hates everyone he thinks made him weak. He hated that Keanu protected you. He hated anyone who took his control away. He hated the idea that you cared about someone else more than you feared him. And when he woke up, confused and furious, the first thing he remembered was the boy he tried to break and couldn't. When those men found him, he told them everything he knew. Keanu dropped his gaze to the floor, shame and exhaustion tightening his features. Sandra reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm. He tensed at first, as though afraid of her reaction, but then he relaxed slightly, letting the warmth of her touch ground him. Raoul stepped forward slowly, his face a stone mask. Michael, he said, if you're here, it means he's made his move. Michael nodded. He has. And he wants both of them? Raoul asked. Yes, Michael replied. He said he won't cooperate unless you bring them to him. Sandra felt a wave of nausea crash through her. Cooperate? She repeated faintly. Cooperate with what? Michael didn't speak for several seconds. Then he whispered, Your father is offering information. Information Raoul and his people have been chasing for 30 years. Information about a night that never made sense to any of us. Keanu stiffened. Raoul tilted his head slightly. What kind of information? Michael swallowed hard. The real reason Keanu was taken by you in the first place. Sandra blinked. What do you mean, the real reason? Wasn't it because he saved me? Keanu shook his head slowly, his eyes closing with a pain so deep it made Sandra's breath falter. Sandra, I didn't just save you that night. Sandra grabbed his arm. Keanu, what else did you do? Keanu hesitated, then Michael stepped in. You got there too late to see it, Michael said. But when Keanu fought your father off, he didn't stop at pushing him away. He did something else. The air felt painfully still. Sandra's voice came out in a whisper. What did he do? Keanu looked at her, his expression raw and haunted. I destroyed something, he whispered. Something your father treasured more than anything, something he believed gave him power, something he was willing to kill for. Sandra's brow furrowed. What could he possibly treasure that much? Keanu looked away, his ledger. A chill slid down Sandra's spine. Ledger. Michael nodded grimly. Your father kept a secret ledger. Names, dates, deals, debts. Things he hid from the police, from his friends, from everyone. That ledger held the truth about his connections. It held proof of the people he had helped and hurt. Raoul's eyes narrowed. And you're saying Keanu destroyed it? Keanu nodded weakly. I didn't mean to, not at first, but when I pushed him away, he hit the table. The impact knocked the drawer open. I saw the ledger inside. When he came at me again, I grabbed it without thinking. He went crazy. He grabbed a knife. I panicked. I hit him with the book. It split. Pages fell everywhere. He lost control. I thought he was going to kill both of us. Sandra felt her knees tremble, and then... I burned it, Keanu whispered. I burned every page. I wanted to make sure he could never use it again. Michael's voice softened. And that's why they wanted him, not because he saved you, but because he destroyed something worth more than any life in this town. Raoul stared at Keanu with a strange mix of anger and respect. So that's the truth, he murmured. All these years, you let us believe it was about the girl, but you were protecting yourself too. Keanu looked at him. I was protecting her, he said. Whatever else happened, whatever mistakes I made, that part has never changed. Raoul sighed. Intentions don't erase consequences. The smaller man stepped forward. Enough talking, we need to take them now. Michael immediately placed himself in front of Sandra. You're not taking her, he said firmly. Not while I'm breathing. Raoul shook his head. You don't get to decide that. At that moment, headlights flashed through the diner windows, blinding them for a second. Sandra turned, shielding her eyes as another car, not one of Raoul's, pulled up to the far side of the lot. Its engine rumbled loudly, fighting against the storm. Raoul stiffened. That's not ours. The scarred stranger cursed. We have to move now. The smaller man reached into his coat again. Sandra's heart stopped until she saw it wasn't a phone this time. It was a gun. She screamed as Keanu leaped in front of her, the scarred stranger stepping beside him. Raoul raised his hand sharply. "Not here," he snapped. "Not with witnesses." The smaller man hesitated, just for a breath. And in that breath, the diner doors were flung open again. This time, 6 people stormed inside, dressed in black, soaking wet from the rain. They moved with precision, fanning out in a practiced formation that made Raoul stiffen instantly. Their faces were partially covered, but their eyes burned with purpose. The lead figure spoke, voice clear and cold. "Raoul, step away from them." Raoul stared at the newcomers with a sudden shift in posture, less control, more alarm. "You," he hissed, "I should have known." Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand tightly. "Don't move," he whispered. Michael slipped to her other side, shielding her from both groups. The lead figure stepped forward. "The organization doesn't control this anymore," he said. "Your orders don't matter now." Raoul's jaw clenched. "And who are you to say that?" The newcomer lifted his chin slightly. "The ones who want Keanu alive." The smaller man's hand tightened on his weapon. "Why?" "Because," the lead figure said, turning his gaze directly to Keanu, "we finally know what your father hid, and we need Sandra to open it." Sandra's chest seized. "Open what?" she whispered. The lead figure pointed directly at her. "The vault he built beneath your childhood home." Keanu froze. Raoul's face darkened. Michael inhaled sharply, and Sandra felt the world drop out from beneath her. The lead figure spoke again, voice cold and final. "And we know the truth, only you can open it." The entire diner erupted into chaos, as both sides reached for her at once, the vault of forgotten truth. The diner exploded into chaos, a storm of movement so fast and violent that Sandra felt her breath torn from her chest before she even understood what was happening. Raoul's men lunged forward, the newcomers in black surged inward, and the scarred stranger shoved Keanu and Sandra toward the back of the diner with a force that nearly knocked them off their feet. Dishes crashed, tables overturned, and the small room became a battlefield, every corner filled with desperation and rage. Keanu pulled Sandra against him, his arm locked around her waist to keep her from being swept into the violent clash. She could hear shouting, grunts of pain, the dull thud of bodies slamming against furniture. The lead figure's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, calling orders she couldn't understand over the chaos. Raoul's voice cut through the noise as well, colder, angrier, more dangerous. "Don't let them take her," he shouted. But someone far closer to her than Raoul had already made that decision. The scarred stranger grabbed Sandra's hand with one powerful yank. "We have to go," he said, his voice strained. "Now." Keanu looked torn, his eyes darting between the fighting and Sandra, panic flashing across his face. "I'm not leaving you," he told her, gripping her hand tightly even as the scarred stranger pulled her toward the back exit. "Move," the stranger barked. Keanu pushed Sandra ahead of him, shielding her from a man who fell backward across a table, blood dripping from his nose. The smaller man working for Raoul saw them escaping and reached for his gun, but the scarred stranger slammed into him, sending both of them crashing into a metal napkin dispenser. The gun skidded across the floor and landed under a booth. "Go," the stranger shouted again, voice cracking under pressure. Keanu didn't hesitate. He guided Sandra through the narrow kitchen, weaving past stunned cooks who ducked for cover as the fight spilled closer. The back door was just ahead, a small metal exit leading into the rain-soaked alley behind the diner. But before they could reach it, someone grabbed Sandra's arm. She screamed as she was yanked backward, her feet slipping on the wet floor. Keanu lunged for her, his hand barely catching hers before she was pulled away completely. For a moment, the world narrowed to the desperate grip between their fingers, the cold sweat on his palm and the overwhelming terror rising in her chest. The man pulling her was one of Raoul's people, his face contorted with desperation. "She's coming with us," he growled. "Like hell she is," Keanu roared, yanking her harder. The man pulled back again, nearly tearing Sandra's arm from its socket. Pain shot through her shoulder and she gasped, feeling herself losing balance. Then Michael appeared from the side, swinging a metal frying pan with all the strength in his body. It collided with the attacker's head, sending him crashing to the floor. Sandra stumbled forward into Keanu, breathing hard, her legs shaking beneath her. "Michael," she tried to speak, but he cut her off. No time, he said, grabbing her elbow. Move. Together, the three of them burst through the back door into the cold rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the alley in sharp flashes that made every shadow seem alive. Puddles splashed under their feet as they ran, breathless, hearts pounding, chased by echoes of violence from inside the diner. Keanu glanced behind them, his face pale. "They won't stop," he said. "They're not going to stop until they have you." Michael nodded. "I know, that's why we're not going to wait." "Wait for what?" Sandra gasped, shivering in the rain. For the first time since entering the diner, Michael met her eyes with a steady, solemn look. "To go home," he said. The word hit Sandra like a punch to the chest. "No," she breathed. "I'm not going back there. I can't." Keanu caught her by the shoulders gently. "Sandra," he whispered, "I'll be with you the whole time. You're not facing it alone." She shook her head, rain mixing with tears she didn't even feel fall. "Keanu, that house, I haven't set foot in it since the night I ran. I can't go back." Michael placed a hand on her arm. "The vault is real," he said. "Your father built it before you were even old enough to walk. He hid something inside it, something worth everything these men have done. And it's locked in a way only you can open." "Why me?" Sandra asked, her voice breaking. "Why would he make me the key to something he cared about?" Michael hesitated, then spoke the truth she had never expected. "Because he never trusted anyone else, not even his own men, but he trusted that you would never go near it on your own." Keanu squeezed her hand. "And now we have to." Before Sandra could reply, the alley behind them erupted with shouting. Raoul's men had found the back door. Their footsteps splashed through the puddles, closing in fast. Michael grabbed her shoulders. "Run," he said. "I'll catch up." "No," Sandra cried. "Michael, don't." But he had already stepped into the alley, positioning himself between them and the men charging forward. Keanu didn't think. He pulled Sandra down the narrow space between two buildings, leading her toward the old main road. Rain hammered against them, the wind howling like a warning. Sandra's lungs burned, her shoes slipping on the wet pavement. Keanu stayed beside her, his body shielding hers whenever they turned a corner, his hand never letting go of hers. They could hear shouting behind them, scattered gunshots, the echo of bodies hitting the ground. Sandra wanted to stop, wanted to go back for Michael, but Keanu pulled her onward. "He'll be fine," Keanu whispered breathlessly. "He knows what he's doing. We need to get to the house." The house, her childhood home. The place where everything started and everything ended. They reached the edge of the old neighborhood minutes later, both drenched, shaking, breathless. The road was empty, the houses dark, the storm casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. Sandra stopped abruptly, staring ahead with wide eyes. There it was. The house she had run from nearly 3 decades ago. The peeling paint, the sagging porch, the broken shutters, all frozen in time like a terrible memory trapped in wood and rust. Keanu looked at her gently. "You're safe with me," he whispered. She nodded slowly, swallowing the fear rising inside her like a tide. Together, they walked up the creaking steps and approached the front door. Sandra hesitated before reaching for the knob, her hand trembling violently. "It's locked," she whispered. But Keanu shook his head. "No." He pushed gently. The door swung open with a slow groan, revealing a dark hallway filled with dust that danced in the faint glow of lightning. The air smelled like old wood, forgotten memories, and something else, something untouched for decades. "Where is it?" Keanu asked. Sandra stepped inside and felt a strange tug in her chest, a whisper of childhood memory rising through years of forced forgetting. "The basement," she said softly. "It's in the basement." Keanu nodded. "Let's go." They moved quietly through the house, every floorboard creaking beneath their weight. The storm outside rattled the windows. Sandra led Keanu to a narrow staircase behind the kitchen, one she never allowed herself to remember until now. She took a deep breath and descended, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was dim, lit only by the flicker of lightning through a tiny window near the ceiling. Old boxes littered the floor, cardboard softened by moisture. Broken shelves leaned against the walls, and at the far end of the room, partially hidden behind a stack of forgotten crates, was a heavy metal door bolted into the foundation. Keanu's breath caught. "That's it." Sandra approached it slowly. The door had no handle, no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. But when she ran her fingers across the cold metal, something clicked in her memory. "My father always said I had the hands of a locksmith," she murmured. Keanu gave her a puzzled look. She pressed her palm against the center of the door. Nothing happened. She frowned, slid her hand slightly to the right. Still nothing. She closed her eyes, remembering the rhythm of her father's footsteps, the sound of his secretive movements in the house late at night, the way he used to whisper to the door when he thought she was asleep. She moved her hand again, and then she felt it, a small, almost invisible indentation shaped exactly like her hand. She pressed down. The metal beneath her palm grew warm, humming softly like a heartbeat. Keanu stepped closer. "What's happening?" The vault door clicked once, twice, then with a deep, slow groan, it slid open. Inside, the vault was lined with metal shelves, filing cabinets, and sealed safety boxes. But one object sat alone in the middle of the room on a small pedestal, a wooden box carved with intricate patterns, darkened by time. Sandra reached toward it. But before she could touch it, a voice echoed from the top of the stairs. "Don't move." Raoul stood there, soaked with rain, a gun aimed at both of them. Keanu stepped in front of Sandra instantly. "You're not taking her," he said. Raoul shook his head. "You're too late, Keanu." Behind him, another figure appeared. Sandra froze. It was her father. His face was pale, half ruined by the injury from decades ago, but his cold eyes were unmistakable. "Hello, Sandra," he rasped, his voice like broken glass. Keanu moved closer to Sandra protectively. Her father smirked. "You opened it good, now step aside." But Sandra shook her head, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. "No," she whispered. Her father stepped closer, fury twisting his expression. "I said step aside." "No," she repeated louder this time, her voice steady. "Not again, not ever again." Keanu squeezed her hand. Raoul aimed the gun at Keanu. "Enough." Before he could fire, someone rushed down the stairs. Michael, bloody, bruised, limping, but alive. He slammed into Raoul with every ounce of strength he had left. The gun went off, the shot echoing through the basement like thunder. Keanu pushed Sandra to the floor, covering her with his body. The gun clattered down the steps, and Raoul and Michael crashed into the wall, fighting violently. Her father lunged for the wooden box. But Sandra was faster. She grabbed it first, clutching it to her chest and stumbling backward. Her father roared with anger. "Give that to me." "No," she said again, her voice shaking with both fear and strength. "This ends now." Her father charged toward her, his face twisted with rage. Keanu lunged. The two collided, hitting the floor hard. Sandra screamed as Keanu struggled beneath her father's weight, the older man's hands clawing at him with frightening strength. Michael shouted something. Raoul yelled in pain. The basement filled with the chaos of bodies fighting, furniture breaking, lives colliding. Sandra did the only thing she could think of. She opened the box. A blast of wind rushed out, papers scattering across the basement like a storm of secrets finally freed. Inside the box was the truth her father had buried: names, dates, crimes, transactions, and one final document addressed to her. Her father froze the moment he saw it. Sandra lifted the document, her hands trembling. It was her mother's letter. Her father screamed, "No, give that to me." Keanu used the distraction to push her father off him. Sandra unfolded the letter with shaking fingers. The first line shattered everything. "If you are reading this, Sandra, then I did not survive to tell you myself." Her mother had known. Her mother had known everything. The crimes, the deals, the violence, and she had left the truth to her daughter. Her father grabbed her arm. "Give it to me." But Sandra pulled away, tears streaming freely now. "No," she whispered. "The truth isn't yours anymore." Keanu stood, bruised but determined. "Leave her alone." Her father lunged again, and Michael stepped between them. The impact sent both men crashing into a shelf, which toppled with a deafening crash. Dust filled the air. Silence followed. Then Keanu grabbed Sandra's shoulders gently. Are you hurt? She shook her head, clutching the letter and box close. The police sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Someone at the diner must have called them. Raoul grabbed the smaller man and fled up the stairs, knowing his organization did not want a police encounter. Keanu looked at Michael, who slumped against the wall, exhausted but smiling faintly. You okay? Keanu asked. I will be, Michael said, coughing. It's finally over. But Sandra knew it was. Because her father, now unconscious, lay in the wreckage of his secrets, and everything she thought she knew about her life had shattered. She wiped her tears, standing slowly. Keanu reached for her hand. Sandra, he whispered, I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for the lies, for dragging you into this. She shook her head. You didn't drag me into this. I was born into it. Keanu swallowed hard. If you want me to walk away after tonight, I will. I'll disappear again. I'll stay gone. You don't owe me anything. She stepped closer to him, her voice softened. But what if I don't want you to go? Keanu blinked, stunned. You do. She shook her head. I ran from the past for years, but I'm not running anymore, and you don't have to either. Keanu's eyes filled with emotion he had buried for 30 years. She took his hand. Then together they looked down at the open letter from her mother, the pages filled with painful truth, but also a final message of love. A love Sandra thought she had lost forever. We'll read it together, she whispered. Keanu nodded, his voice breaking. Together. Outside, sirens grew louder. Inside, Sandra stood beside the man who had saved her life and given up his own for her. The truth had broken them, but it had also set them free.